Melissa Carter stood at the long dining table, arranging glasses, plates, and cutlery with trembling hands. She had spent the whole day cooking Daniel's favorite dishes: spicy roast chicken, golden fries, and coconut rice. Her heart pounded. She whispered to herself, "Tonight, he will see how much I love him." Outside the kitchen door, Sophia sat nervously in the living room. She had been living with them temporarily, but her presence had become a thorn in Melissa's heart. Melissa forced a smile. Daniel had promised that tonight would be special. At exactly 7 p.m., Daniel Carter walked in wearing a striped designer jacket. His usual charming smile masked the irritation in his eyes. He bent to kiss Melissa on the cheek but stopped midway, mumbling instead, "Smells good in here." Melissa's eyes followed him as he dropped his keys. She noticed he didn't remove his wedding ring, a habit he had formed only recently after being confronted about taking it off. Sophia avoided his eyes. She glanced at Aunt Margaret, who had just arrived in her vibrant green native attire, her laughter booming as she settled on the sofa. "Melissa," Aunt Margaret said with a knowing grin, "this your house is too quiet for a party." They all gathered at the table. The warm glow from the chandelier cast a soft light on everyone's faces. Melissa sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly. Daniel sat opposite her, scrolling through his phone as though nothing mattered. Sophia kept glancing at Aunt Margaret, who kept sipping her drink and observing like a hawk. The food was untouched. Silence stretched. Finally, Aunt Margaret broke it. "So, Daniel, how's work? Or is there another business you've been busy with?" Daniel chuckled nervously. "Aunt Margaret, you know I'm always working hard for this family." Melissa's eyes burned. Melissa sat rigidly at the head of the table, her fingers gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across from her, Daniel scrolled through his phone, pretending to read messages, his brow furrowed in artificial concentration. Sophia's hands trembled as she toyed with her napkin, folding and unfolding it until it was nothing but a wrinkled scrap. Aunt Margaret watched them all like a hawk. Her eyes, though framed by age, gleamed with the sharpness of someone who had lived too long and seen too much. She sipped her drink slowly, her rings clinking against the glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone pause. "Daniel." Daniel glanced up, startled, then forced a smile. "Yes, Aunt. How's work? Or, is there another business you've been busy with?" He chuckled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Always working hard for the family, Aunt. You know how it is." Margaret set her glass down carefully, leaning forward just enough for the gold bangles on her wrist to clink. Hard work, yes, but I've learned one thing in life. A man who works too hard outside his home leaves his soul behind." Sophia's fork slipped and clattered onto her plate. Melissa's eyes flicked toward her aunt, then back to Daniel. Her heartbeat quickened. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. "I'm not sure what you're insinuating." Margaret's lips curved into a knowing smile, the kind that sent chills down Daniel's spine. "Oh, Daniel, I don't insinuate. I state facts." Melissa straightened, her voice soft but sharp. "Aunt Margaret, what exactly do you mean?" Margaret reached for a piece of chicken, tearing it delicately, then laid it back on her plate untouched. Her eyes never left Daniel's. "Ask your husband. Or perhaps, better still, ask your guest." The word guest landed like a thunderclap. Sophia's eyes widened. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, the glasses rattling. "Enough. You don't know what you're talking about." Margaret didn't even flinch. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing like a lioness about to strike. "Oh, but I do. I've seen the looks, the late-night calls, the way you avoid your wife's eyes. I warned your father before he died. A man who hides behind lies will choke on them eventually." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. The air felt thick, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Daniel, what is she saying?" Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, sweat beading at his temples. "Nothing, Melissa. She's just old. She doesn't know anything." Margaret laughed softly, but it was not a laugh of amusement. It was low, hollow, and dangerous. Old? Maybe. Blind? Never. Sophia, my dear, would you like to explain to your hostess why your hands are shaking? Sophia froze, her lips parting but no sound escaping. The napkin slipped from her fingers to the floor. Her pulse roared in her ears. Margaret folded her hands neatly in her lap, her expression almost gentle now. Secrets rot the soul, my child. Speak before they devour you. Melissa turned her gaze on Sophia, her eyes glistening with pain and confusion. Sophia, what is she talking about? Tell me now. The room fell into a silence so complete it was deafening. The chandelier buzzed faintly, the only sound in the suffocating space. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Sophia opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered barely audibly, I can't. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glared at Margaret with pure hatred. You've gone too far. Margaret leaned back, her voice soft but lethal. No, Daniel. You did. Melissa's hands trembled as she set her glass down. She could feel the edges of her carefully built world crumbling. This wasn't a dinner anymore. It was a courtroom, and Aunt Margaret had just started the trial. Sophia's hands trembled so badly the fork slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the plate with a sharp clang. She stared at her lap, breathing unevenly, her chest rising and falling as though she had run a mile. Melissa's voice broke the stillness. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper laced with pain. Sophia, talk to me. What is Aunt Margaret saying? Sophia kept her eyes down. Her lips trembled. She had rehearsed this moment in her head countless times, but now that it was here, her voice refused to come out. Aunt Margaret leaned back in her chair, folding her arms with a look of grim patience. She's your cousin, Melissa. You've trusted her like a sister. She's been living under your roof, eating your food. You deserve to know the truth. Melissa blinked, confusion knitting her brows. Of course I know she's my cousin, but what truth? Sophia's eyes shot up then back down again, as though shame itself had weight. I didn't want you to find out like this. Melissa's chair creaked as she leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table. Find out what? Sophia, you're scaring me. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glaring at Sophia, his jaw tight. Don't say anything. She doesn't need to know. Melissa's gaze whipped to him, her eyes flashing. She's my cousin, Daniel. My blood. What don't I need to know? Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her voice came out small, broken, like glass cracking under pressure. Melissa, I'm sorry. Daniel and we've been together. Melissa's heart stopped. For a moment the world tilted, her ears ringing, her breath caught halfway in her throat. Together? What? What do you mean? Sophia's sob became a choking sound. I didn't plan it. He said your marriage was over. He said you didn't care anymore. He said he loved me. Melissa, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Aunt Margaret's eyes softened, but she stayed silent, letting the devastation fall. Melissa blinked furiously, trying to process. Her cousin, her husband, her home, all conspiring behind her back. Pregnant. Sophia nodded slowly, shame burning her cheeks. 3 months. I was going to tell you after dinner tonight. I swear I didn't want to hurt you. Melissa's voice rose for the first time, a sharp edge slicing through the room. You didn't want to hurt me? You're my cousin, Sophia. My blood. I took you in when you had nowhere to go. I paid your school fees. I gave you a home. Sophia sobbed openly now, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. I know. I hate myself for it. Daniel finally stood, slamming his palm on the table. Enough. This is between me and Melissa. Sophia doesn't owe you an explanation. Melissa turned on him, eyes blazing. Between you and me? You're sleeping with my cousin under my roof, Daniel. Under my roof. And you want to stand there and act like this is nothing. Aunt Margaret cleared her throat softly, her presence anchoring the chaos. I warned you, Daniel. I warned you, Sophia. Secrets like this don't stay buried. Melissa, my child, hold your head high. You are the only one here who has not betrayed anyone. Melissa pushed back her chair and rose slowly, her yellow gown catching the light like molten gold. Her hands trembled, but her voice had become cold and steady. I want you both out of my house. Now. Sophia hiccuped through her tears. Please, Melissa, don't throw me out. I have no one. Melissa's lips quivered but her eyes stayed hard. You had me, Sophia. You had me. Melissa stood at the head of the table, her yellow gown shimmering under the light. She no longer looked like a wounded wife. She looked like a queen ready to reclaim her throne. She drew a deep, slow breath, letting the tremor in her hands still. Then she began to speak. Her voice was low, measured, each word sharp enough to cut glass. I see. So this is what my home has become. Daniel's face twitched as he tried to muster defiance, but his eyes flickered with unease. Sophia buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Aunt Margaret stayed seated, watching with the calm of someone who knew what was coming. You think I'm stupid. You think I don't notice the late-night calls, the sudden trips, the coldness in your touch. Daniel. She turned her gaze fully on him, unflinching. You thought you were clever. Daniel opened his mouth, but Melissa held up a hand, silencing him. And you, Sophia. My cousin. My sister in everything but name. You thought I would never see through your innocent smiles. But let me tell you something. She stepped closer to Sophia, her heels clicking like a metronome of doom against the polished floor. I knew the day you moved into this house. I knew the day Daniel started sneaking off under the pretext of work. I knew the day you stopped calling me Sister Melissa and started calling me just Melissa like a stranger. Sophia's sobs grew louder. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his temple. Melissa turned, her eyes glistening but her chin high. Do you know why I cooked this dinner tonight? Because tonight was the night I wanted you both in the same room. Tonight was the night I wanted to see your faces when the truth came out. Aunt Margaret's lips curved in a slow, proud smile. My child, you've played your hand well. Melissa reached for her bag, the one she had placed under her chair earlier, and set it on the table. The soft thud of it landing made Daniel flinch. You think you're the only ones who can plot? Daniel, Sophia. This dinner was never about celebration. It was about closure. She opened the bag and pulled out a thick envelope sealed in red. She placed it in front of Daniel with deliberate care. Divorce papers. I filed them 2 weeks ago. And these. She reached back into the bag, producing another set of documents, title deeds, bank statements, and ownership papers. These are the deeds to this house, the business, and the cars. All in my name. Everything you've been flaunting, Daniel, is mine. Every bill, every tile, every glass of water you've drunk under this roof, paid for by me. Daniel's face drained of color. He reached for the papers with trembling hands, scanning them quickly. Melissa, wait, we can work this out. Melissa, cutting him off. No. You can't cheat your way out of this one. Sophia's sobbing slowed as she looked up, disbelief flickering in her eyes. You knew all this time. Melissa's gaze was ice. Every single detail. Down to the secret bank account you helped him open. Sophia gasped. Daniel's head snapped toward her. You told her. I didn't. She must have found out somehow. Melissa folded her arms, the documents still on the table. I didn't need anyone to tell me. A woman knows. And I've been preparing for this night for months. Aunt Margaret rose slowly, her voice carrying authority. Melissa, my dear, speak your mind fully. Let them feel the weight of what they've done. Melissa's eyes hardened. Daniel, you're finished. You'll leave this house tonight with nothing but your clothes. Sophia, you will not spend another night under this roof. I have packed your things. There's a taxi waiting outside. Sophia's jaw dropped. Melissa, please. Don't. I've heard enough pleas for a lifetime. She turned to Daniel, who now looked like a man drowning. Melissa, we built this life together. No, Daniel. I built this life. You came along for the ride and mistook my kindness for weakness. The room vibrated with tension. Even the chandelier seemed to sway slightly. Aunt Margaret moved closer to Melissa, placing a hand on her shoulder. You've done well, my child. Now lift your head and let them go. Melissa inhaled deeply, her shoulders squaring. For the first time that night, she felt taller than both of them. You will both leave before I return from my room. Otherwise, the police will escort you out. This is my house now, my rules. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and held it to her ear. Yes, come in now. Outside, the faint sound of a car engine hummed. Sophia and Daniel exchanged panicked glances. Aunt Margaret's smile deepened, satisfied. Melissa turned on her heel, her yellow gown catching the light like a flame, and walked slowly toward the hallway. Each click of her heels was a gavel striking down judgment. Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through the documents Melissa had slammed onto the table. His eyes darted across the pages, sweat collecting at his hairline. Sophia sat slumped in her chair, her tears staining the silk of her blouse, her hands clutching her belly as though it were the only anchor left. Melissa didn't move from her spot. Her yellow gown glowed like molten sunlight against the dark wood of the table, her chin high, her eyes locked on Daniel. Aunt Margaret stood to one side, arms crossed, her face carved into a mask of satisfaction and sorrow. Read it carefully, Daniel. Every line, every signature, every stamp. Daniel swallowed hard, scanning the bold letters at the top of the papers. Petition for divorce. His fingers twitched. Melissa, this is insane. We can fix this. Melissa, no, Daniel. I fixed it the day I filed. This is me freeing myself. She reached for another stack of papers and placed them next to the divorce petition. And these are the deeds. The house, the vehicles, the business investments, the joint accounts, all mine. Transferred, secured, and sealed. Sophia gasped softly, wiping her face. But how? Melissa tilted her head slightly, her voice low but firm. While you two were sneaking around, I was meeting with lawyers. While you were playing games, I was moving assets. I was not sleeping, Sophia. I was watching. Daniel's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. Melissa, we're married. You can't just take everything. Melissa's laugh was short and humorless. Married? You mean the contract you broke with every secret meeting, every lie, every touch you gave to my cousin under my roof? Aunt Margaret stepped closer, her voice like iron. She can. And she has. You thought her silence meant ignorance. It meant patience. Daniel slammed his fist on the table, but the sound rang hollow. This isn't fair. You're ruining my life. Melissa's eyes hardened, the last flicker of softness gone. I'm not ruining your life, Daniel. You did that the moment you betrayed me. Sophia's sobs grew into hiccuped whispers. Melissa, please. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean to fall for him. Melissa turned to her cousin, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. You didn't mean to fall for him? You didn't mean to move into my home? You didn't mean to betray me with the man I married? Sophia, you're carrying his child. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Sophia's eyes flooded with tears. I have nowhere to go. Melissa's gaze flicked to Aunt Margaret. She'll find somewhere, but not here. Aunt Margaret nodded once, approving. Melissa took a step closer to Daniel, her voice dropping into a cold whisper. You see, Daniel, I could have thrown you out months ago, but I wanted you to feel this. To sit at my table, under my roof, and watch as everything you thought you controlled slips through your fingers. Daniel's lips trembled. He tried one last time, his tone desperate. Melissa, think of the years we've been together. Think of the things we've built. Melissa straightened, her chin high. I have thought of them. And I'm done thinking. The years I gave you are gone. The future I gave myself begins now. She slid the papers back toward him. Sign them. Tonight. Or I take this to court and make you a public spectacle. I have all the evidence I need. Daniel's mouth opened but no words came out. He looked at Sophia, but she was too busy crying to meet his eyes. Aunt Margaret moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, headlights cut through the night. A taxi was waiting at the gate. Your ride is here. Both of you. Best not to keep the driver waiting. Melissa's phone buzzed. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and then set it back down. Pack whatever belongs to you. Nothing else leaves this house. The driver will take you where you need to go. Sophia wiped her eyes, whispering, Melissa, please don't do this. Melissa turned her back to them, walking toward the hallway. I'm not doing anything to you, Sophia. I'm doing something for myself. Daniel's knees buckled as he collapsed into a chair, the papers trembling in his hands. His empire, his marriage, his home, his status, had evaporated in one evening. Aunt Margaret walked past him, pausing only to lay a hand on his shoulder. Her words were soft but sharp enough to cut. When you betray a good woman, Daniel, you don't just lose her. You lose everything she built around you. Aunt Margaret straightened her wrapper, her eyes darting from one face to the other. She had seen many family dramas in her lifetime, but this one was different. This was not just a quarrel. This was a reckoning. Melissa returned from the hallway, no longer trembling. She had changed from the yellow gown into a deep emerald wrap dress, a symbolic rebirth. Her hair, still immaculate, caught the light as she stepped back into the room with slow, deliberate grace. She placed a small velvet pouch on the table. The sound of it landing was soft, but final. Inside are your wedding ring, Daniel, and the house keys. This chapter is over. Daniel's eyes were red-rimmed, his voice cracked. Melissa, don't do this. Please. I'll do anything. I'll change. Melissa shook her head. Change should have come before betrayal, Daniel, not after exposure. Sophia's voice broke as she whispered, Where will I go? What will I do with this baby? Melissa's face softened for a fleeting second, not in forgiveness, but in pity. That is no longer my responsibility, Sophia. You chose this path. Aunt Margaret moved toward Sophia, her tone brisk but not cruel. Pack your things. Tonight. Go back to your parents. This child is innocent, but you must learn. Sophia let out a soft wail, burying her face in her hands. Daniel reached for Melissa, but she stepped back. We built this together. You can't just. Melissa cut him off, her voice low and even. I built it, Daniel. I fed it. I protected it. And you infected it with lies. You'll leave with what you came with, nothing. Aunt Margaret clapped her hands once, sharply. Enough begging, Daniel. Enough tears, Sophia. The taxi is waiting. Go before I call security to escort you out. Sophia stood slowly, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Her mascara had streaked into dark rivers down her cheeks. Daniel remained seated, staring at the divorce papers as though they were written in another language. Melissa watched them without expression. Then she spoke again, her tone almost ceremonial. This house was once a place of love. Tonight it becomes a place of endings. You are no longer welcome here. Sophia shuffled toward the door. Daniel rose unsteadily, his jaw tightening. He wanted to explode, to shout, to reclaim control, but the weight of the moment held him down. As they exited, the soft hum of the waiting taxi's engine drifted into the room. Aunt Margaret followed them to the door, ensuring they left without drama. She returned moments later, brushing her hands together as if dusting off the past. Melissa was already at the window, watching the taxi pull away. No tears came, only a long, deep breath. Aunt Margaret, are you all right, my child? Melissa turned, her eyes shining not with pain but with clarity. For the first time in years, Auntie, I'm more than all right. She moved to the table and began clearing the untouched dishes one by one, her movements steady. Aunt Margaret joined her silently, the two women working together in unspoken solidarity. The clock in the hallway chimed 11 times. With each chime, Melissa felt a weight lifting. She took off her apron and dropped it on the chair. Freedom doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with silence. Aunt Margaret smiled, a glint of admiration in her eyes. What you did tonight, Melissa, most women only dream of doing. You faced the storm and walked through it. Melissa sat down, folding her hands together. I was afraid, Auntie. Afraid of losing him, afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over. But fear is a cage. Tonight I unlocked it. Aunt Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Melissa's hand. You are not alone. You have me. You have yourself. And that's more powerful than any marriage built on lies. Melissa smiled faintly. Tomorrow, I'll start packing his things into storage. Tomorrow, I'll call my lawyer to finalize everything. Tomorrow, I'll repaint this room. And tonight, Melissa exhaled, a full breath of relief. Tonight, I'll sleep in peace. She rose and walked toward the stairs, her heels clicking softly on the polished wood. Aunt Margaret watched her go, then looked back at the cleared table, a battlefield now silent after war. Downstairs, Aunt Margaret was making tea. The aroma of fresh ginger and lemon floated through the house. Melissa padded down the staircase barefoot, the polished wood cool under her feet. She inhaled deeply, savoring the clean air of a house no longer poisoned by secrets. Aunt Margaret, you slept well. Melissa nodded, a small smile breaking across her face. Like a child. No nightmares. No phone calls. Just peace. They sat at the kitchen island with their mugs. Outside, the garden sparkled with dew. Birds hopped across the manicured lawn, free and unbothered. The lawyers called me early this morning. Daniel signed the papers. Melissa exhaled, setting down her mug. Good. That chapter is finally over. Aunt Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. And this arrived for you, an invitation. A women's business networking event. They want you to speak. Melissa raised her eyebrows. Me? Aunt Margaret chuckled. Yes, you. People noticed how you quietly built your life. How you handled the storm. They want to hear your story. Melissa opened the envelope, skimming the elegant font. She smiled again, but this time with genuine excitement. For so long, I thought my story ended with Daniel. But maybe it's only just beginning. Later that week, Melissa walked into a bright, airy office building downtown. She had signed the lease for a new space, her own boutique interior design studio. The room smelled of fresh paint and possibility. A large window overlooked the city skyline. She ran her fingers along the edge of a sleek desk, imagining clients coming in, projects rolling out, her name on invoices and contracts. She could already see the new life forming. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Daniel sat alone in a cramped apartment, staring at his phone. The calls had stopped. The favors dried up. His reputation, once untouchable, was now in tatters. He opened a message from Sophia. The baby is sick. We need money. He tossed the phone aside and buried his face in his hands. Back in her studio, Melissa pinned a vision board to the wall. Swatches of fabric, photographs of renovated homes, sketches of furniture. Aunt Margaret walked in carrying a bag of snacks. Your new staff will be here next week. Young designers. Hungry minds. Melissa smiled softly. I want to build a space where no one feels trapped. Where they can grow. I want to mentor young women. Teach them not just to decorate spaces, but to protect themselves from the traps I fell into. That's the spirit. Melissa picked up a small framed photograph from a box. A picture of her younger self at her wedding with Daniel, smiling brightly. She stared at it for a moment, then slipped it back into the box, sealing it shut. That's done. She turned toward the window, letting the sunlight pour over her face. Later that evening, Melissa and Aunt Margaret sat on the balcony of her newly repainted home. The walls were now soft jade green. The dining room had been transformed into a sunny studio. Fresh flowers filled vases on every surface. Aunt Margaret sipped her tea. "Do you realize how far you've come? From the woman who sat quietly at that table, to this." Melissa smiled, her eyes glistening but calm. "I do. And I'm grateful. Because losing everything I thought I needed gave me everything I actually needed, myself." A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden below. Melissa closed her eyes, absorbing the moment. Melissa, freedom smells like this.